The 2015 Polyglot Gathering is brought to you by italki. Become fluent in any language.
Anybody know who this guy is? Hamlet, right. Anybody know who this guy is? That's Soy Hamlet of Cupcake. And so the story begins. Soy Hamlet of Cupcake came to Berlin. He has an interest in other languages, and people kept asking him, okay, we know how to memorize words. We're like really good at using crazy images, and we know all this stuff. But what about conjugating verbs? And so he grew a yo-yo out of his ear, or his neck, and he threw it and smashed it at soy milk because he's a real big fan of soy milk. And they wanted another example. So he put on a tutu, and then he started to woo Aries. And it's Hamlet, right? So he's thinking to be, and you to be, and so forth. And then he had a problem with coming up with all kinds of images and cutting out backgrounds and making slides. So he just did this. And he thought, as it goes into the distance, you could make your own images with tutus and cupcakes and yo-yos and so forth, and try to match it with a table that you might want to memorize when you're learning a language. And then they said, okay, well, that's infinitive. What about preterite? And I said, well, or Hamlet said, sorry. Hamlet said, well, then just switch me out for a different guy, because maybe you know another person. This is Michel Foucault, the French philosopher, but it could be the Foo Fighters, or it could be that someone has a dog named Foo-Foo. I don't know. But I'm going to explain why this is interesting in a second. Then you go to another set on the table, and you get Eric Clapton, or maybe you have a brother named Eric, or maybe someone you know is an airhead, and you can put this in there. And why you would kind of want to do this is because it's a location-based mnemonic strategy. And so it's not just mnemonics, it's not just images that are being used to memorize words, but they're being used in conjunction with particular locations. And you can be very, very strategic about it. So no matter what you want to memorize, if you break it down and associate it with images and then strategically place it in an order, you increase your chances of recall by multiple times, because you have crazy imagery, you have places to go to visit that crazy imagery, you have figures that you've associated with specific elements of the word. You've broken words down into different pieces and associated them with particular figures, and so you can follow that figure along the journey. And one of the biggest questions that comes is, well, how are you going to do that when you're in a conversation? And the answer is you don't. You just use this to get it into long-term recall by following this journey a sufficient number of times and reading, writing, speaking, listening, all the good stuff that goes along with language learning. And it is an alternative to spaced repetition software. You essentially use a memory palace to become your own spaced repetition software. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that works. So memory palaces are always under construction. And just in case nobody noticed, this is where we are right now. And it's not under construction right now, but Google is an amazing time machine, and I managed to find a construction site of this hotel. So another sort of thing is that it just doesn't always have to do with words as such. You could use it for symbols. You may not recognize this guy, but that says a pound, and that says a pound, and that says a pound, and he is in my imagination. And that's my bed, which doesn't quite show up all that well. That's my desk. And if we continue, Ezra Pound goes through all of these symbols until the end. And in my mind, I just go through that journey a sufficient number of times until I can see them visually, I can write them visually, I can know what the sounds are. Accent is a different story, you got to work on that. But nonetheless, have a basis in, let's say, an hour and a half, 2 hours. Which may or may not be impressive in comparison to what other people can do, but for me and people like me, this is absolute miracle. It's a miracle compared to the kinds of things that I've done and other people that I've taught have done, where they're spending months and months to get glacial amounts of progress that is now happening in a number of hours. Now, of course, you have to take it into practice, and you have to make it that use gets it into your longer-term memory and gets it into motor abilities and muscle memory in your mouth and so forth. But it can be incredibly fast, and you just need to use the locations in very strategic ways, and you need to create the images in strategic ways, and then you need to recall in strategic ways. So let me say a little bit more about the bridging figures. You can't always keep them with you along the journey. Sometimes they just don't fit whatever that word might be that you're using it to memorize, or that symbol or character set. So along a journey, you could switch from Foucault to Eric Clapton to Hamlet and his cupcake, and you can almost like pass a baton. And you can make that baton passing memorable, and you can link the baton passing and everything they do, not just with the word, but the sound and the meaning at the same time. And that's a very, very critical thing, because if you can only recall the sound, but you don't know what it means, you've got nothing. If you can only recall the meaning, but you can't recall the sound, this is not very good. So you want to be able to link the sound and the meaning, and then if you were to pass the baton, you can have that baton passing, which doesn't have to be a baton, it could be a cupcake or a gun or whatever the case may be. You can use that also as part of triggering for yourself the sound and the meaning of the material that you're memorizing. Now, you don't have to use this hotel or this hostel. You could use the body, and Batman is one that I really like. The only problem with using the body for language learning, memorization, and memorization in general is that it's such a compressed amount of space, and sometimes you need Eric Clapton or Batman himself to be able to do a lot of movement. He needs to move from here to there. So if you put an image on the left ear of Batman and it needs a lot of space, then Batman's not going to be so good. You could use his body for one word, whereas you might want to use him for 10 words. And unfortunately, you can't really see this, but it says that he has underwear that cuts his blood circulation, which may be memorable or not. But the point being is you can use a body as a memory palace, and it would still be a location-based strategy, and then you would just decide where you're going to start. And one of the things that's very interesting that helps people a lot is to think strategically about where you're going to start in a memory palace. You want to be able to, or it's advisable to have a linear journey where you are moving from an inner spot to an outer spot. So in other words, I would start here in this memory palace. I would start here actually, and then I'd go there, and then I'd go there, and then I would go out, and then I'd go that way, and then I'd try to think about how I could use that room, and then go down without crossing my path, without going zigzagging, as linear as possible. And the reason for that is it reduces the cognitive load. If I were to start here, go there, go there, go there, and then back there, then I have to think, what came next? What? And then that's getting in the way of the actual architecture, the roller coaster ride. The whole point of this is to rest the material that you're trying to memorize, the crazy images along a track that you almost have to not think about, to reduce that amount of thought that's required to move from station to station is a very, very critical point. And you do it by doing two things. You make it linear, and you start at an end point so you're not starting on the street and coming here, and now you're in a dead end, and there's nowhere else to go. Because then essentially that memory palace is over. But if we start here, then we can go to the Hauptbahnhof, and we can go wherever we want to go. So those are some interesting points to keep in mind. And I mentioned that you sometimes can wind up memorizing the sound of a word and being able to say words that you don't know the meaning for, or you can know meanings and not know the words, and that's really being like dressed up without the slightest reason why. So how are we going to deal with this? In memory, a lot of this is speculative, but they've tested it, and so take it with a grain of salt. But there's something called the primacy effect and the forgetting curve. Primacy effect suggests that the first thing you hear will tend to stick better, and the last thing you hear will tend to stick better. So we don't know what I'm going to say at the end, but you might remember the joke about being a memoryholic and not when I memorize too much, I tend to fall down. You might memorize that much more than you would memorize the middle of the speech, although That's why there's a cartoon to help get it a little bit more memorable. And then maybe the thing that I say at the end, if I do my job well, will also be memorable. And that would be the primacy effect, is that particular things stick in your mind because of this effect. So the beginning and the end, and if you're clever, you get a really funny cartoon in the middle to try and give some buoyancy. Now the forgetting curve is also basically a different way of saying the same thing, which is that it will slump over time, and it will slump with respect to when that you learned it, in what order that the information came into your memory or into your exposure. So how are we going to deal with this when we're with memory palaces without using SRS? This is the challenge, and it's pretty easy to solve. I don't think Ollie is here, but if he were, I'd ask him if he recognizes this, because this is a memory palace that Ollie created. I inserted the numbers, but he drew this. This is his apartment in Cairo, and he's a big skeptic of all this sort of stuff. I'll leave it to you to go and talk to him and see what he said afterwards, but I think he's... I'll leave it to you to ask him. But it was very interesting what his response was to all of this and the effects that it had for him. And so I asked him to get his apartment. We followed the basics of a linear journey, starting at an endpoint where he cannot block himself. That's not a dead end. That's where he starts, so that he can actually exit the apartment. And the journey is linear. This was a little bit a gray area, but nonetheless still going out towards that exit point. And that was one of his questions. How am I going to make this like SRS software? And so one of the first things that you do, and this is very, very good if you do this, is when you're recalling the information in your mind, like let's say there's a big chicken who is roasting feathers, or actually let me give you a concrete example. The playwright Bertolt Brecht is carrying a giant vase, and a zero is whipping him with licorice, and the vase is going to fall on the ground. That's happening at number 1. And so a 0 with Brecht and licorice is zerbrechlich, right? Fragile. And so it's an equation. It's math. Just to give you a concrete example of how this can work. And nowhere in this image really is something that gives you the meaning of fragile in a linguistic sense, where you somehow encoded the word fragile in there. It's just the image of this fragile vase, because in English mother tongue you would think, you would just naturally associate that vases are fragile because, I don't know, Sesame Street introduced it first. But that's just a concrete example of what's happening in number 1. So you would start in number 1, you'd have Brecht and a 0, and you would either have Brecht go along the journey or the 0 go along the journey, or maybe both of them to get another word, and another word. You go forward, then you go back. Then you start at 4, and you go back. Then you start at 4, then you go to 8. And that's a cycle. That's helping overcome the primacy effect. It's helping overcome the forgetting curve, because you're actually making in your mind the effort to travel it in different ways. Now, you don't have the SRS advantage of it saying, you haven't reviewed this in a while, but you do have the advantage of having given yourself a kind of sort system. And to make it a little bit more fun, you can do 1, 3, 5, and 7, forward and backwards. And you can do 2, 4, 6, and 8. And that's just one memory palace. If you have 10 memory palaces and you've got 10 words, that's 100 words, and you, of your own accord, your own discipline, you do this kind of stuff, you've increased the chances of getting this material into long-term memory. You can add phrases later, but just concretize these words in this place at first, and I think you're going to have a very, very wonderful experience. And yeah, so that is a way to get a sort machine in your own brain, is to go backwards and forwards from the middle to the end, from the middle to the beginning, and then the odd numbers and the even numbers back and forth from the middle to the end, you know what I'm saying. So you kind of organize it inside of yourself, you sort it inside of yourself. Now, as I mentioned before, all of this is for nothing if you don't read, write, speak, and listen. And in my experience, having taught this for several years now and written many books and had all kinds of feedback, this is the thing nobody wants to do. They just love that they can memorize all kinds of words, and they just, whoa, 200 words in 10 days, and now I'm hearing things and seeing things, and it's like the world has opened for me, but I'm not fluent. And that's it, right there. That's what you're going to do with this stuff, ideally, hopefully. So given that, I just want to go very quickly over some different ways that you can go about building memory palaces so that they're foolproof. I've gone through it in general, but I'll give you some visual examples, that being starting in a location that you can't drive yourself into a dead end and going in a linear journey. So you can draw the memory palace. This is from a student of mine. He's way over the top. It doesn't have to be this complex. It can just be square, 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 more like Ollie's thing, or even more broken down than that. It can just be very simple. But I love when I see this, because there's strategy, and he's thinking, and he's actually making it so much more real and vibrant in his mind by taking the step to really, account for, it almost looks like there's a fork there or something, like he's really gotten into it. And that is a good exercise in and of itself, because it's increasing your spatial location when you exercise. So I often tell people, even if you're never going to use it, make some memory palaces. That's good mind exercise in and of itself. It has virtuous properties and fitness, brain fitness properties as well. So if you're looking for something to do later, draw a memory palace of this hotel, or several memory palaces of this hotel. Draw a memory palace of your home. Maybe you remember your childhood home. Maybe you remember a hotel in France, or whatever the case may be. And just draw them for their own sake and see how that you can feel dimensions in your mind. Now you can use a computer too. I actually did that on purpose. I didn't leave that R out. I meant to say compute. You can compute a memory palace. And what we have here is very square. It's not organic the way you get from a pen and pencil, but it's really quite lovely. And he's done something very interesting that I advise, which is to keep a top-down list where he is showing images and what they're going to help him remember. So I don't know how clearly that is showing up, but there's very, very detailed words, the English, and then the target language. And again, he's following the principles more or less, except for he's driving himself almost into a dead end, it seems. So how that will work for him, I'm not entirely sure. I want to get in touch with him. But one of the things that happens also when you drive yourself into a dead end, you get what I call memory palace claustrophobia. And it really can stress you out, because you're thinking, oh my goodness, I'm running out of space, and you start thinking more about the memory palace than the target information. I know it's funny, and it's worth laughing at, but it's true. It happens to people, and I get emails all the time saying, oh, it's not working, and I'm all stressed out, and I say, you're experiencing memory palace claustrophobia, aren't you? Or memory palace scarcity, where they're like, oh, I don't have enough memory palaces. These are conditions that need to go into the DSM next time that they update it. The next thing is, which will probably be tomorrow, they're going to watch this on YouTube, and they're like, damn, another page. Okay, so another thing that you can do is integrate it with photographs. Now, of course, you're not going to actually memorize this. You're going to do it in your mind. But by taking this step, that memory palace becomes more of a tool. It becomes more real. It becomes more located in your brain and more accessible to your brain because you've gone through these steps. And this is one of the most successful students that I have had, and the reason why is this effort. Going these extra steps to add photographs, have a top-down list, and she's even got people, and it's quite busy and complex, but it's still starting in a terminal place where she can't trap herself in a dead end, moving in this formation linear without crossing the path, and then going outside, and she can build another memory palace in the driveway or whatever the case may be. Another thing that you can do, if you're dead set on SRS, and I've been doing experiments with this, and it's cool because it makes SRS so much fun. The reason why I never get success from SRS is because it really feels like having a hammer against my brain, and I just don't have fun with it. Yes?
What does SRS stand for again?
Space repetition software. So things like Anki, before you know it. Sorry, I just assumed that everybody knows what SRS is. I apologize. Space repetition software is what I mean. That sort of device that you, through self-reporting, you tell it that you now feel comfortable, that you've memorized that word. In some cases, they sort them away and they bring them back after a number of exposures, and in other cases, they might assign a color to it. So you could say, this is a green word because I got this one, and this is, red alert. It has to come back more often. And I always found that really frustrating. Like, I really didn't like it, and I spent so many hours with wishful thinking that it was going to work, and it really never did because it's so boring, or for me, and for many people, literally hundreds and hundreds, getting onto over 1,000 emails now just about that topic. I have a folder just about how painful some people have found space repetition software and how that they don't enjoy it. So what I came up with was what if we bring the two together? This is Ollie's memory palace again, and Ollie was working on Arabic, specifically Egyptian Arabic. And so what we did was, okay, why don't we, the index card represents the spaced repetition software. What if we have the indication on the card of where it is in the memory palace? So this is station 1 in the memory palace, which would be different than station 2. And then we have the characters, the word as it would appear in a newspaper. And then we have his own personal transliteration that means something to him in terms of how he wants to get the pronunciation back. And instead of the definition on the other side, the image that he created to help him recall the sound and the meaning of the word. So I don't know if you can see that, but it is a cow recently mooing ach into the face of Khan from Star Trek, directed by Ron Howard, as they stand in front of a theater that has recently released a movie called that word. Okay? So it's the meaning, the image brings back the meaning and the sound, and it doesn't give you the answer of what the word is. It asks you to come up with it yourself based on the image. So you're not looking, oh, that's what it is. You're actually prompting yourself to use your imagination, linking your imagination to that corner. And it's really, really powerful because it's not just throwing it into the void, hoping that it sticks. If you see it enough time, you self-report that it's green or you self-report that it's condition red, you're actually causing your brain to decode something and bring that meaning through images. And you can eject this later. You don't need to take the training wheels on your next trip to Japan or whatever. But if you do enough sort and sift on your own, and you do the extra work of reading, writing, listening, speaking, then I can virtually guarantee you that you will have miraculous experiences, or near miraculous. And I'm not trying to say this is a silver bullet or a giant solution, but if you give this a try, I think you're really, really going to love it and be surprised. Now, this is, hey, everybody look out, it's one of those, with the fire and stuff. And so it says, despite its name, the thesaurus was quite often at a loss for words, which is a very lovely cartoon. And but why I brought it was not to talk about being at a loss for words, but being at a loss for images. Because a lot of people say, well, it's easy for you to start talking about Hamlet with a yo-yo coming out of his neck and soy and then tutus and Brecht with liquor, or zeros with Brecht and licorice. I mean, they attribute that I have some kind of superpower that I can come up with this. And to be honest, I was a film professor for 10 years, and I also have written lots of novels and sort of stuff. So I do have a little bit of training in that, but I'm not a visual person in my mind, even though I was a film professor. I could never see. I never was a film professor to the extent that I was looking at mise en scène or different kinds of framing and cutting and all this sort of stuff. I was just thinking about story, and story as a conceptual thing that has frameworks, and it has memory palaces, it has touchstones and spots. So the people often say their complaint is that they're not at a loss for words as such. Well, they are, but they're at a loss for images. How do you come up with all these crazy, wild stories? Well, you exercise to have the ability. So what I recommend, if you're interested in this and you feel that your mind can't come up with all kinds of crazy images to associate with words, this sounds lovely, but I can't do that. Well, you can, and you do it by training. So this is push-ups. This is imagery push-ups. You would get, you don't have to do it this way, but this is the way I would do it. Figure, object, action, reaction. So you collect a number of figures. I, for this example, have Brad Pitt, Joan Rivers, Barack Obama, and the Canadian Devil. And Canadian Devil from South Park, just for you. But, and then what you do is you pick an object, nail clippers, hot iron fridge, sailboat, and then you pick an action. So Brad Pitt jumps on Joan Rivers, and then you have a reaction. Joan Rivers defends with giant nail clippers. Now this is just abstract. There's no particular linkage to any foreign language words, but it's the push-up. Or let's say it's skipping. So the boxer skips, doesn't skip when he's in the ring, or she's in the ring. The boxer does the has the benefit of skipping, but it's a completely different thing that they're doing. But they wouldn't be such a great boxer and so agile on their feet if they didn't do the skipping. So when you do this kind of thing, when you come to some words that you want to memorize, you're going to have a much easier time coming up with stuff to associate with images and cartoons in your mind. And it really, really works well for the students when they take the time to do this training. And also, it's something very nice that Benny mentions in Fluent in 3 months, which is that he talks about that sort of thing of how am I going to come up with all these crazy images, and he points out right away is that it gets easier almost 5 minutes later. You just start doing it, and it will create critical mass, and it will be hard not to come up with images. And so if you need a point of access, a point of entry, this is a drill that you can do for yourself. So I called this talk the Zen of memory techniques, and there's a reason why that I think of it in terms of Zen. And I was talking about memory palace claustrophobia and memory palace scarcity and so forth. There's all kinds of stress that is related to memory. We're trained to be stressful about it from birth. We see our parents stressed out about memory. We have had those things where we can't remember a name and we are embarrassed and we have shame and so forth. And the solution to this really is meditation. The solution is relaxation. So I often teach people to meditate, to do what's called pendulum breathing, which I'm not going to demonstrate right now because it sounds kind of weird, but ask me and I'll show you. And there's other kinds of breathing that you can practice before that you spend time memorizing. And quite frankly, I would suggest that you do it before you spend time learning anything. Be relaxed, because it helps overcome physical issues that you may be having, and most especially it overcomes that voice that says, this is stupid, this is crazy, this will never work, this is a waste of time. Because I've been doing this for years and years and years. I only have a PhD because I did this. My brain was completely fried with all kinds of antipsychotics and pills for depression and so forth. This stuff saved my life. Memory techniques, being relaxed saved my life, and meditating and just chilling out, learning how to chill out, learning how to be Zen. And it really helps with that voice that says, this is impossible, this is stupid, and you can't do this. Might still be there, but 10 years later, I still have to do this because that voice still comes. I don't know why, but I'm the boss of it now, and it's Zen. Why Zen archery, which I didn't mention in the title, it was getting a little bit too long already, but Zen archery is because just imagine that you could stand in the middle of this room, fire a word there, fire a word there, fire a word there, fire a word there, and it sticks until you want to go and get it. And then you can either leave it there or you can go and pull the arrow, whatever you like. Boom, 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 boom. And here's the thing. This is, again, not a magic bullet. It's not a special pill. It's not anything like that. But if we were to take away the language learning for a second, there are people that you may have heard of who go to something called the World Memory Championships, and there are national championships around the world. They can memorize cards so fast that in order to test their abilities, their training, that to compete at higher levels, they are building a device that will show cards faster than the human hands can move the cards, because they want to push that limit. And in the previous talk, it was mentioned that pi can never. You could memorize a lot of it, but you would die before you even could get that far in pi. But the reality is it's not how much that's interesting, it's how fast. So one of the experiments that I'm starting to do, and I'll tell you right now it's not working so great, but I'm still fascinated with it and I'm doing it, is Spreeder. And I don't know if everybody knows Spreeder, but Spreeder is essentially like this mechanism where they're firing cards at people's eyes as faster than the human hand can flip cards, and faster than the fastest person can memorize a deck of cards, which is around 30 seconds was the last sort of thing. I think it's even faster in the last year. 30 seconds for 52 cards, right? That's amazing. So my question is, using Spreeder, which flashes words forward so you can read faster, one word at a time, tick, 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 how fast could you memorize first stage words in your native tongue, and how fast could you push it memorizing words in another language? Now the problem is individual words, you need also the definitions, and then you got multiple definitions and multiple pronunciations and so forth. But the reason why I mention it is because I think that I know there's a way to train yourself to memorize, retain, and recall words faster than you can imagine. Because the thing with memory champions, they'll be the first people to tell you there is nothing extraordinary about their memory. there's absolutely nothing special about them. They don't have Mensa cards. They don't have high IQs. They have just taken these techniques, and they have used passion, of course, and interest, and they find it fun. I assume they find it fun. I certainly find it fun. And they've been able to push the limits, and they're pushing the limit. They now need technology to help them push the limits. And so I don't see why that this can't work for language learning. It's its own thing, and I've seen it work for language learning, so I want to see how that we can push the limits on that as well. So I want to just end quickly that, you know, this is a quote. It says, "Never ever, under any circumstances, doubt your ability to learn, to figure things out, and to add value to others." And it's that final point that is so important, that if you try this, and I hope that you do, you should teach somebody else as soon as you can, because that's what's really going to teach it to you. So that's my talk. If you have any questions, please use this link to, if you have questions after this question session, you can use this link to send me an email. If you'd like this slide presentation, I'll send it to you as a PDF. And if you look at the last page of the program, I wrote an essay there, and you can take a free 4-video course, complimentary, and I think it will give you a better sense of these ideas because it's more lengthy. I've gone quite fast for the purposes of this presentation, but I talk slower on the video, and there's more visuals and so forth. So I hope you take advantage of that. And again, if you'd like a PDF of this slide presentation, happy to give that for you. So teach somebody. I think that's the ultimate thing of all this, is to share what you've learned, and it doesn't have to be memory techniques, but my sitar teacher once told me that it's 20 years to learn, it's 20 years to perform, and 20 years to teach. Then you're a guru, and you can do it all at the same time. So, thank you.
Wow. I'm kind of floored, blown away. I'm even at a loss for metaphors. One question. I think I'm a bit spatially challenged. And I thought I might apply this in a memory palace using the stations on the U4 U-Bahn line in Vienna. Would that work?
Yeah.
Because it's extremely linear. You don't have to, you don't have to like sort of work your way around a place, imaginary or otherwise.
It works gangbusters. What it requires is just that you know the stops, right? And if you know the stops, then you can limit the amount that you have to recall in order to recall. Does that make sense? So the less cognitive overload you can add. That's the whole point of this, is that so long as you don't have to think about what comes next, or there's a minimum amount of thinking what comes next, then it's a very, very good memory palace. The other thing that you have the advantage of, now I've only been a little bit on the Vienna transit system, but if I were to use Berlin, there's something, and Toronto and New York, there's something universally true about almost every station along a subway track, is that there is a platform, and the platform has a left side, a middle side, and a right side. So you could imagine in your mind coming into the station, you step outside of the back of the train, and then you see something on the platform, then you see something in the middle of the platform, then you see something at the end of the platform, get back on the train, go to the next station. So that's 3 things that you could have just there. Depending on the extent that you know that platform, you could have 5, you could have 6. There might be a little stand there to buy some junk food, and hopefully you wouldn't buy the junk food, you just use it for your memory, because the junk food is going to harm your memory, so it would be at a loss. So yeah. The other thing, if you're spatially challenged, and I've had many people do this, and I did it myself, and it's really fun, is if you're using your home, just go along with your eyes closed or open and touch the walls. All the walls, as much as you can. And this will make it more concrete. Your spatial, it could improve your spatial abilities in your mind. So,
I have 2 questions. One I just forgot, which I think is funny.
We were talking about that yesterday, weren't we?
Yeah, we were. I was paying attention to touching the walls because I'm very tactile. So, but my main question is, do you ever reuse a particular memory palace? And now I remember the second one, and that is, once you've memorized what's happening and you have these vocabulary words, do you just throw them out or say, I don't need this anymore?
I wouldn't call it throwing them out, but you can clean out a memory palace. I didn't want to get all too intense with everything, but when it comes to reusing a memory palace, there's different ways that you can do it, and it answers two questions at once. So let's say you've got Brecht or Spider-Man, and he's going along a journey through your house, and you've used him to memorize a bunch of words that start with the letter S, because he's Spider-Man, right? And then you want to use John Travolta in that same place. You could actually use the power of what you've already memorized. So now it's John Travolta with a Spider-Man mask, and he's going along and using that original imagery and compounding onto it for the next thing you want to memorize. That's where words turn into phrases, actually. So let's say you have kept 10 words and you want to add phrases to each one. Those words are already there, but you're able to reuse it as such in order to add more words to the pool that you've already established. And so you're anchoring material onto material, or compounding, as I would call it. Now, in terms of using memory palaces multiple times, here's something to try. It doesn't work that great for foreign language vocabulary, but it works good for things like poetry, and it works good for cards to a certain extent. Is imagine that we're in this room right now. This is the real version of this room. We've charted it out. It's a well-formed memory palace. Now imagine that we're in the black version of this room. And now imagine that we're in the blue version of this room. Imagine that we're in the green and the red and the yellow. And I purposely alphabetized the colors that I just mentioned because that helps with recall what comes next, right? So there's something called ghosting. Just because you've called this the yellow version of this room doesn't mean you're not going to see what's in the original version. But you can reuse it in an interesting way, and you could practice to get really, really good at it if it's the yellow version. What works even better is not just that it's the yellow version of this room, but it's placed beside the other one. So you can imagine that we're on a street, that every house on the street is a version of this room. It doesn't have to be colors. It could be wood, stone, grass, cloud, and so forth. This is called adding a condition. Often they call this in the world of memory techniques. You add a condition to a memory palace in order to make it another memory palace, even though it's the same memory palace. So that's those are options you can explore.
One thing that Andre said about being spatially challenged, I can add to that, and I want to just mention these details in case these resonate for anyone else in the room. But by the time I was 10 or 11, I realized that even though I had been going to the same school 8 kilometers from my home for 5 years, I had no idea how to get there. I had no idea what the color of my home was. I mean, I'm completely oblivious to physical things unless it's a human face or a word, in which case it's almost like this sucking motion coming into my brain. So when I've experimented a little with this kind of thing, I've tried, the idea of a spatial thing of any sort in my head to remember something is so painful, which discourages me right away, because the point of this for most of us, I think, is pleasure, right? For most of us. And I can't connect with that. And now, I mean, I'm interested, though, in learning more. I'm just wondering if that resonates for you also from what you've heard with from people who've come to you.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, if it's painful, don't do it. That's why I don't. That's why I don't have. That's why I don't have Anki on my iPhone. But I don't even want to risk having pain. But I mean, if you're willing to experiment, one thing that you can do is you have a home right now, I assume. Yes. Do you know? Could you get an image, or even not a visual image, but just a feeling for the difference between where your bedroom is and where your kitchen is?
That I'm pretty clear on.
Well, then you. That's all you need. That's all you need. And if when you're doing this, you feel that it's cloudy or it's foggy and it's not working out, then just go and stand in your bedroom and dance with whatever image, and then go and walk to your kitchen and kiss whatever image, or go do whatever, involve emotion, but be there. And then later, when you're driving to work, you can think, "Oh, what was I doing in the kitchen?" You know, and then. Well, I was thinking of a fork, not anything too rowdy, but. Do you know what I'm saying? It's something, if you're willing to experiment with that, actually go to the place and do the work there, not mentally, not imaginatively. Well, mentally and imaginatively, but while you're actually there. I mean, this is how we form memories anyway. And if you can you're here now, right? there's something that happens when we're in novel locations where the brain produces more norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is extremely useful for, well, not useful for, it's used for memory formation. Oh yeah, it's useful for it because if you can deliberately trigger the novelty effect by going to a new cafe to memorize or some exciting place, like my best memory palace in the world is the Acropolis. Right? There's no more novel thing that I could have done as a fan and a lifelong memory guy than to go and be at the Acropolis and use it to memorize some Greek words. And so that's norepinephrine is giving it an extra kick on top of that. And I can zoom there right now in my mind more than I can zoom to my own home. So actually, I only lived there for 2 weeks. So, but anyway, that's you know what I'm saying. So if you're willing to experiment, I think you're going to find some solutions.
Hi. So now we focused a lot on visual and spatial memorizing, and let me share an oral technique that corresponds to oral learners. So does anyone know about minimal pairs in linguistics? Can you raise your hands? Okay. So the thing is building minimal pairs. So for others, I will make a demonstration. So I can make a demonstration in French, which is the language I teach, and in English, then to make it more explicit. Like in French, I will take one sound like P, just a consonant P, and then you combine it with different vowels, like la part, a piece of something, le père, father, la peur, fear, le port, port, pour, for pur, pure. Okay, that's for French. So now you can do it also for English. Let's try it with like ale. So ale, bale, kale, dale, sail, fail, hail, gale, male, nail, etc. So this works very well because I have tested it with my community of students, and we had very good results. So for teachers or for you or for learners, you can build like tables when you combine the sounds. And for teachers, I encourage you to use this. Yeah, that's it. And also, you were talking about fast memorizing. This helps you learning very fast because you can make the list and recite it like a song. So that was a technique I wanted to share.
Absolutely. I would add to that a little bit that people who know multiple languages are at a very special advantage because you don't have to use your mother tongue as the foundation. You could use other languages. So often when I come across something that has an ist sound in it, well then there's Hamlet, right? Because ist in German and to be and so forth. Or if I had gone further with crazy images down in the lobby there, in that graphic that I opened with Hamlet, I could have had Hamlet interacting with it from Stephen King's It, but it would be S because in German it is S, and it would still be that clown, but my mind would have no problem switching from German to help me memorize Asia S or yes, you know what I'm saying? So it's not even English anymore, but it's now using English and German to get to Spanish. So you're at a very, very special advantage, and then using techniques which I would say are location independent mnemonics. So that's very lovely as well, and you can have multiple languages going on with that.
Hi, Anthony. I'm very much an SRS person, and I'm very fascinated by the idea of combining SRS and memory palaces. I was wondering, in that example card that you were showing, does it matter which side is front or back, or is there a certain way to use the technique with the SRS?
Ideally, you would do both. You would allow yourself to encounter both the thing with Arabic that I would suggest, well, any language, but especially when you're dealing with a character set that's quite foreign to yourself, is when you see that mnemonic, that description of the cow with Khan and saying ah and so forth, is that you would actually not just say in your mind, at least for the beginning stages, not just say it in your mind, but actually write it down. That's the one thing that I didn't mention, if I can go quickly into it, is if you really want to track your results, what I recommend that you do is you write down your mnemonics and you write down the target word and the meaning that you're focusing on, and you can even do a transliteration for yourself, like we saw on that card from Ollie. And then what you can do is you go in isolation. You don't allow yourself any chance to cheat, and you write out from your memory what it is that you've memorized, and then you go and compare it against the record. So in the last talk, Christopher was talking about throwing the mnemonics away. The whole point is to throw them away. Yes and no, because if you actually take the step to make a paper copy of your memory palace and make a paper copy of the thing that you've memorized, yes, you can throw the mnemonics away in your mind, but you can share those with others, and that's what Memorize is in many ways, right? Is the sharing of what people have taken the step to write down and gather a picture and so forth. And you don't need to throw it away. You can make your own website, or you can add to Memorize and share what you've done by taking that and use it as the method of testing yourself. So long as you make sure that you have the discipline to remove yourself from the source material, because what happens with so many people with SRS is, flip and close your eyes, and that's not going to get anywhere. But when you use this, well, it will, but you know what I'm saying. It's just kind of a ineffective thing to close your eyes and, oh, did it stick this time? But when you use these kinds of techniques, you remove yourself from what you're studying and you go and reproduce it from memory and you record it. You're just paying attention to the information in a completely different way, and a way that I think gives you greater chances for recall. You're adding chance on top of it. And when chance meets preparation, there is no, when preparation meets opportunity, let's say, there's no ceiling. And you mentioned the word ceiling before in your talk, but there doesn't have to be a ceiling, really, when opportunity or chance meets preparation.
Okay, the last question.
Thanks, Anthony.
Okay.
You mentioned about dead ends, and I wonder if you could quickly tell us. It seems like if you had a linear memory palace, that a dead end is necessary. So does that mean that we need to try to make a circuit in every memory palace, or can we do a linear one and go back or something? Is there a necessity to have a circuit?
No, I mean, these are guidelines that I give. There's no necessity or specific rule. The reason why that I came up with these for myself, and they've been successful for so many other people, is because of reducing the cognitive load, reducing the need to think about what comes next. So I'm not sure exactly what you mean by circuit, but if going very detailed through your kitchen and every cabinet works for you, then that's fantastic. But if it's not working for you, this is one thing that people get caught up in, is they have this memory palace scarcity. I got to include everything because I got 1,000 words, and so I got to get at least 100 in my kitchen. You'd be surprised. I've got people who say, I want to memorize 5,000 words in Russian and I need it next month, and and it's just, slow down, let's get 10, and sort of thing. But in terms of like a circuit, basically what is very useful, and it helps people when I teach them this, is that if you can't incorporate your bedroom and use these principles of starting in a terminal location and not crossing your own path, if you can't obey those principles, just let the bedroom go. Come back some other time, just get the results. Bring it down to its minimum amount of mental effort so that you can focus on the target material. That's what it's all about. And I feel sometimes like an evil genius criminal, because I've given something, or I've found it myself, and I've gotten so fascinated with it, and then I help fascinate other people to the point that they're obsessed with the memory techniques, and they're just thinking about memory techniques and not using them because the possibilities are so intense. So to answer your question, it doesn't have to be linear. It doesn't have to have a circuit. It doesn't have to have any of those things. And there are people who they tell me the most amazing video games that they use. I couldn't even imagine using a video game, but it works for them. They get the results that they're looking for. So it's a free world, but if you want guidelines, I got them.
Okay, Anthony, thank you very much. We will remember that.